Ladies and gentle devs, you are in for a treat. In this tutorial, we are doing some much needed spring cleaning to our projects. We are taking our prefabs, nested prefabs, and prefab variants to the level of absolutely prefabulous, and we are ending the madness that has become of our project hierarchies. We won't be making explosions or fancy dissolve shaders. But let me tell you guys the dirty secret of game development. Finishing a game isn't about fancy normal maps or snazzy post-process effects. It's about keeping your back end tight so things don't go to shit. Game dev isn't just fun in games. People's livelihoods are put on the line when projects fail. Well-executed workflows and meticulously kept file structures matter. The passion to make next-level games must be tempered by the responsibility of creating a solid foundation to shoulder the complexity of your team's wildest dreams. There is no silver bullet for finishing off a game, but I'll do my darndest to impart some hard-earned lessons in the hopes it inspires you to up your own game and become better, faster, and stronger. Now let's fire up Unity and kick this learning session off proper. Here we find a typical level scene. We have access to a specific set of environment assets, some NPC stuff, and some enemy spawn setups. We have an assortment of things here that make a playable level. But is it geared for rapid asset generation? Does it facilitate fast and in-depth tuning of values across our full range of content as we seek to polish our games? It's common knowledge that we need sane file structures to organize our art assets, materials, textures, etc. But what is often overlooked is the organizing of prefabs and other designer-created content in a structure that allows us for rapid tuning and creation of gameplay objects. In the wake of Unity's amazing prefab variants and nested prefab systems, it's more important than ever to adopt workflows that better categorize these prefab inheritances. Now let's jump into the meat of this tutorial, a content creation scene that's engineered specifically to do the things that our levels are not: content generation and prefab management. This is our content scene. It's nothing fancy, but every asset is placed with great purpose. If we follow the lineage of any of these fish to their origin, we find they all link to a singular prefab core. Let's turn back the time on the creation of these fish. Let's recreate the core NPC fish prefab from scratch, which we will then use to spawn a pointer fish archetype and a boss variant to put this pipeline into perspective. When creating these prefab hierarchies, we want to find the happy medium of having our core prefabs instilling necessary properties in their variants without excess baggage being propagated across the project. Always start by creating the most basic usable asset you can imagine. So we begin with our absolute core NPC prefab, the blueprint from which all fish to come will receive their digital anatomy. It has no physical form, but it has the AI brain. It has the functional scripts and setups required for a fish to do fish things. When this core prefab is adjusted, our changes will propagate to all NPC content in the game. Some of our fish will bite, some will swim away, and some will dash about the ocean. We will add unique behaviors later when appropriate. Right now we are only interested in the basic universal functionality of most all fish. Be careful to give these unique core prefabs a unique naming convention with the words core fully capitalized at the start of its name as an identifier. We don't want to accidentally modify core assets often, so having very overt flags that differentiate them from other assets is important. The root prefab has all necessary colliders included, so all that's required is to drag and drop some art. It's important that you develop your own setups to immediately play well with art assets to ensure content creation is streamlined. With our art popped into our archetype, the only thing left to do is size the existing colliders to the unique proportions of our model. The new archetype is almost ready to go. This is our root pointerfish NPC. So we will add to this archetype attacks and abilities that we want all pointerfish variants to have access to and create some settings that fit this type of fish. All of our pointer fish will be fast, tiny, and non-aggressive. They will be wily and use dash attacks to charge in at the player from a distance. Now that our archetype is fleshed out, we can create further variants that keep the inherent spirit of this pointer fish archetype and allow us to add new nuances or bells and whistles as we see fit. We'll start by making the most basic version of our fish possible, likely a direct copy of the root archetype fish with no additional bells and whistles. This is redundant, but we do not want core archetype fish used as an in-game asset. This secures it from designer mistakes, and most importantly, creates a very obvious chain of inheritance that we can see at a glance in our scene. As wonderful as prefabs are, try to resist the urge to go overboard and use them as organizational tools within your scene. Extensive use of empty game objects within content scenes is of great importance. By leaving these dividers as non-prefab assets, we avoid selection issues within the editor. Notice that if I click on a fish within the scene that is childed under a prefab itself, it selects the top-level prefab instead. This extra overhead and disruption to scene flow simply isn't worth it. If by chance I wanted to access these categories of assets in another scene for any reason, I can select the top empty game object container, Control-C copy them, open another scene, and Control-V paste them in. There is unique prefab behavior to note. If you click the Select button in Scene mode, it will take you to the asset's prefab in the project hierarchy. But if you are in Prefab Edit mode, it will take you to the prefab's parent, and clicking the name in the upper left will select itself in the project hierarchy. It's a little hard to pick up at first, but useful once you get the hang of it to navigate between the current asset and its parent prefab. If after selecting lots of random things you find your workspace to be getting out of hand, you can Alt-click a top-level empty game object, release Alt when you unclick, and your hierarchy will be nice and clean again. But it requires a top-level empty game object to collapse them all. Okay, back to core workflow. Now that we have access to nested prefabs, you can think of prefabs as a portal to other dimensions. Nested prefabs open up our workflows to exciting new ways of inter-scene connectivity, so long as both scenes have the same prefab within. If you're working in a scene with other people, nested prefabs allow you to work in the same space without stepping on each other's toes. Let's say we're working with Chris, and Chris wants to do a detail pass on a small section of a level while someone else is working with the core level scene. What we can do is create a prefab within our scene called Chris's Sandbox that will allow Chris to save their additions to the scene. When changes are finished, they don't have to change the scene file. They can simply save project changes. The main level designer can then move all of these nested prefabs out of Chris's prefab portal into their appropriate location in the scene hierarchy. As we build up prefab game assets, our content scene starts to turn into a three-dimensional filing system, a visual catalog, where we can quickly jump from asset to asset without having to poke around an increasingly cumbersome file structure. We can see at a glance and select in our scene view what needs adjustment. Is our green top-hatted fish with a shotgun doing too much damage? We can easily isolate him and tone down his damage on the spot. Our arch-type prefabs form the root of our categorized prefab trees, and growing upwards are several prefab variants that form the trunk. All of our fish forming the trunk share the same level of inheritance, with the root archetype as their parent, and the branches that stem from these archetypes are prefab variants of the trunk prefab. The visual branching of these assets in our scene directly correlates with their inheritance. Let's say the need arises that we need all of our NPCs to have a hat. Because of our global inheritance setups, it is now as simple as adding this asset to our root prefab. Since every instance of content is visually displayed in the scene, tailoring each hat to each archetype is a very simple matter. Additionally, if at any point inheritance isn't happening appropriately, it is easy to see where the disconnect is happening because of the anatomy of our prefab setups. The hat is a great visual example, but the same global propagation could have been done by adding a vital new AI script, or adding a new collision volume, or even the removal of older, no longer used components. Prefab variants let us scale things up or down, expanding on features or consolidating them. Hey look, it's a cat in a hat with a bat. While recording footage for this tutorial, I noticed an issue that was globally affecting all of my NPCs. As you can see, the head collider was offset by a small value. We simply load the core fish prefab, isolate the head collider, and set the z-coordinate to 0. Easy peasy. No matter how many hundreds of variants you want to create in the future, there will never be the looming fear that a tsunami of mass content upkeep will come crashing over your project. With proper prefab setups, you will always have immediate and global control over every corner of your project, meaning sweeping optimizations to performance, game balance, tidiness, and any other component will always be at your fingertips. The peace of mind that prefab variants gives you is literally game-changing. Let's wrap up the tutorial section of this video by highlighting some issues regarding prefabs that are important to be aware of, as well as a few suggestions that I believe would greatly improve the overall experience of working in Unity. A unique color code if an adjustment is only affecting the scene object. This would help alleviate the disconnect between viewing a scene object and objects in Prefab Edit mode that behave very similarly. In this mockup, I show a pink color instead of the usual blue for modified value. Because the color is so different, it would very immediately communicate that this value change is unique to the scene, and is not affecting the prefab value. A new toggle button in the inspector for prefab assets that allows for prefabs to behave as if they are being edited in prefab mode while in the scene inspector. There is no instance for assets in my construction scene that I would ever want to change not to propagate to their root prefab, and having to constantly right-click values and choose the correct next-level parent is very tedious over time. A scene-level option for this functionality would be even more welcome. There is no naming synchronicity between scene objects and referenced prefab names. If a scene prefab has its name altered, there is no way to propagate this to its parent prefab, and vice versa. Setting a value that matches the parent prefab's value will still look like a modified value even if they are identical. Opening a nested prefab while in prefab mode, then going back, will exit all the way back to the scene, not back to the prior prefab. Creating a new locked inspector of the current window you are working on is a bit of a pain, and working across multiple objects in Unity often feels like a game of cat and mouse, tracking down a window you were just in and have lost reference to. It would be fantastic if middle mouse clicking an inspector tab opened a locked floating window of this tab that the user could dock wherever they pleased. It would be nice if Ctrl-Shift-N created empty game objects at a zeroed out transform on the currently selected object, childed under said object. Currently it creates an empty game object at the focal position of the camera, and at the top level of the inspector hierarchy. This last suggestion may be a little pie in the sky, but it would be awesome. I showed scriptable game objects and how they can layer on top of each other to modify assets. But imagine if we could do this in our prefab variants by inputting values such as times 0.8, declaring that you would like to use this field to have 80% of the value of the parent prefab, and allowing synchronicity of this percentage whenever the parent is modified. With these suggestions, the tutorial section of this video is coming to a close. But stick around, we're about to put these systems into practice, and we have suffered putting together a sane and healthy prefab hierarchy. We have streamlined the creation of assets, which means we can finally make cool stuff. I'm going to quickly whip up a heinous cyborg shark, complete with a unique power-up drop for the player to collect. Let's define some neat combo mechanics, and use prefab variants to pair with our unique charge attack mechanics. With our assets created, let's create some neat color and lighting arrangements for our scene, and pop in a unique musical number. I won't bore you guys too much with our game's unique setups, but if you're curious about how we went about things, you're welcome to watch the background video at slow play speeds or by asking questions below. Now without further ado, let's play a small snapshot of the game. I've been in a mad dash to get these prefabs online and to produce a tutorial worthy of your time. I pray you can see through the rough design blemishes to a game that sparks a sense of childish wonder while simultaneously beckoning you to its dark depths, where challenge and reward await, limited only by your carnal thirst for fish blood and twitch ability.
Finish him!
I've been working on this in a cave for over a year now. This is not the do-or-die moment for the project, but it's an important one. This is the first time that I am seeking potential outside help that can provide room to breathe. Doing this alone has become a tremendous effort, and has become demanding in so many ways outside of the basics of design, code, art, and sound. Having to change gears hard to create this tutorial has caused all development to go on standstill. As the lead developer, this is gutting. I am happy to provide this tutorial and finally reveal the game that I'm very proud of, but in doing so, the restrictions of my limited backing has become painfully apparent. I'm watching this game grow by leaps and bounds, and its potential is maddening. I cannot in my lonesome provide the nourishment that it deserves. The thought that my bias may be clouding my judgment and this game isn't as great as I believe is likewise maddening. But I'm rambling. I've linked a pitch document in the description below, so if you know a guy who knows a gal who knows Notch, Gabe Newell, Shigeru Miyamoto, Ernest Borgnine, and you want to help a brother out, float them a link to this video and pitch document. It would mean everything. Seeing as this is a big reveal, I would also like to give some shoutouts to some amazing people that made this project possible. People that this project remains indebted to this day. To Melissa, Mayhem, Vlad, and Blaze, you guys created some amazing fish and animations. To Macon, who said I could use his music some 6 years ago on a random polygonal artboard and probably doesn't even remember the project. Thank you. Most importantly, shout out to the Knights of Unity. They're a reliable art house in Poland. They've worked with me to create this over several years. Complex combat systems and scaling progression mechanics. They're now fully online and they're totally kicking ass. Kicking fish ass. Sir Daniel oversaw several coders over the past couple years for this project. It would have been really easy for these guys to take advantage of a nobody solo indie dev through the good times and bad, but here we are, and I feel like we might be on the verge of maybe something awesome. We'll see. To you still listening, thank you for lending your ear. I hope the tools and practices you learned watching this video help you funnel whatever awesome dreams and ambitions you have into your own project in a non-reckless and sustainable way. Scratch that. Be reckless. Do awesome shit. But do it responsibly. Final shout out, and we can all share in this one, to the tireless developers at Unity Technologies. You guys are fucking awesome. Our project would not be possible without your engine and asset store. There are thousands of dollars worth of sound and art assets that you can glean throughout this tutorial that really helped our production at an incredibly affordable price. It's a blessing to be using such powerful and accessible tools. We had faith and geared our project in a huge way in anticipation for the current state of prefabs, and you guys didn't disappoint. The scope and breadth of content we have confidently put into motion is 100% owed to your remarkably expandable engine. I'm going to end this with a little bit of affirmation. Some of you may not need it, but some of us do. We all struggle making games, especially early on, or when chasing a pie-in-the-sky dream after experiencing the nightmare this industry can be. If it was easy, everyone would do it. In this big dog-eat-dog world, in this demanding and soul-crushing medium, and amidst this often ravenous gaming community, we must put our heads down and drown out the noises of doubt by smothering them with the clickety-clack of our mouse clicks and keyboard strokes. You cannot save a project with a night's worth of cleanup, but every painstakingly planned pipeline, every properly named asset, every prefab correctly inherited is a step towards seeing you through this crazy gambit. I hope you see huge gains internalizing these practices, and I greatly look forward to playing all the kick-ass games you guys are tirelessly whipping up for us in the future. It's crazy what we subject ourselves to, so that strangers may swing swords at orcs. But load up your scene, put on some hot jams, be excited for your project, and do your best to just have fun with it. This has been Some Game Dev Guy. If you like this video, hell yeah. Have a good day, everybody. Now that our archetype is flashing, God damn it. Now that our archetype is fleshed out, we can create further variants that keep the inherent spirit of this archetype and allow us to add new nuances. Motherfucker, who wrote this shit?